Good afternoon. My name is Sean Ulmer. I'm Executive Director here at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. I want to thank you all for joining me for another presentation of our Grant Wood in Focus series. This is a series of Zoom programs that we do quarterly on some aspect or another of Grant Wood's life or career. Today we're going to take a look at Grant Wood's time in Germany, which is not something that I was particularly familiar with, but it is something that all of the scholars point to as being pivotal in his growth as an artist. And so I personally wanted to learn a little bit more about it. I certainly knew it in the broad strokes, but I didn't know any of the particulars, the really kind of drill down particulars that oftentimes don't make it into scholarly presentations or scholarly articles. So I personally wanted to dig a little bit deeper and share those findings with you. And it's been a very interesting voyage for me. It's like most of these topics with Grant Wood, it's a bit of a black hole. Once you start going down it, there's no bottom to it. You just keep going and going and going. And there is much more work to be done, I'll be honest with you, on Grant Wood's time in Germany. But I hope to perhaps whet the appetite of one of the people listening in or viewing this later to pick up where I leave off and to dig even deeper and perhaps find some of the things that I found to be particularly elusive that might give us even greater insights into Grant Wood's time in Germany. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I've pulled together a PowerPoint. Let me see, here we are. Okay, we'll go ahead and start the slideshow from the beginning here. So I'm not going to go into a great deal of depth in Grant Wood's biography. It's very large. Many books have been written on Grant Wood's life and career, and too much to go into in this brief introduction. But we're instead going to focus specifically on Grant Wood's time in Germany, which was in the fall of 1928. And it was not his first trip abroad. In fact, it was his fourth trip abroad. And I wanted to include this slide that kind of outlined his other trips. He had been to Europe before, primarily to Paris and France in general. First in 1920, with his good friend, Marvin Cohn. They arrived by way of Liverpool, journeyed over to London where they spent a few days, and then traveled over to Paris, which is where they spent the summer. And departed by way of Antwerp. We know a lot about that trip because of Marvin Cohn's very, very accurate diary, mostly complete, but accurate diary, which told us what the two boys were up to in the summer of 1920, where they went, where they were painting. It's a fascinating document and gives us great insight to kind of the day-to-day happenings or experiences that these two young artists had in 1920. We know that Grant returned in 1923-24 to attend the Académie Julienne in Paris. About 14 months from the early summer of 23 through August of 24. There were some side trips in there, notably a brief trip to Italy as well. We have some extant Italian paintings from him from that trip. And then he returns again in the summer of 1926 for an exhibition of work by him at the Galerie Carmine in Paris, something that he had set up while he was a student in Paris. And he went a little bit early. That exhibition opened at the beginning of July. He went a little bit early and actually created much of the work for that exhibition. He wasn't bringing it over with him from the States. He actually was kind of creating it on site. And that was through various locations around Paris, or in that Ile-de-France area around Paris, focusing primarily on Gothic architecture and in particular doorways. He's going to be fascinated at that time with doorways, especially in Gothic architecture. And that was really the corpus of the exhibition. He really had hoped that would launch his career. It did not. He did make a few sales out of that show, but it did not launch his career. That was to come much later. But we don't know very much about his trip to Germany, really. We know that it was in the fall of 1928. We do not have any precise dates. Unlike Marvin Cohn, he was not a diary keeper. And so we don't have very much information on his time in Germany. We know it was approximately 3 months that he was there. But again, we don't have a lot of information as to the things that he did and saw and visited and so forth. It really comes about through sort of extant work and what we've been able to kind of piece together ourselves. And this was the reason why he went to Germany in the fall of 1928. Cedar Rapids was building a new Veterans Memorial Coliseum in the late 20s. And Grant Wood received the commission. It was a competition. He received the commission for the large stained glass window that adorned the first floor of the Memorial Coliseum. This window. And it was quite a commission. Grant Wood, of course, had no experience in stained glass, but that certainly didn't stop him for applying for and receiving this commission. It was a significant commission. It was a $9,000 commission, which was a lot of money in 1927 when he received it. And it was a very, very important and prestigious building. And I don't know, I've not been able to ascertain other artists who applied for this commission, but certainly Grant Wood was already a well-established artist in Cedar Rapids. He was well known in the community by the late 20s, certainly, and in all likelihood, amongst the local artists, it would either probably have come down to Grant Wood or Marvin Cohn as the two premier artists working at that time. There were many other good, competent artists working in Cedar Rapids at that time, but I was not able to find details on other other artists who wanted to do this commission. And it was a little it's kind of a sideline in some ways, because it also sort of would take me a little off track, because I really wanted to focus on his time in Germany. And while the stained glass commission was his reason for going, it's not really the focus of my presentation here. It is certainly the conduit for his trip to Germany. So here, a much better image of it. You can see it's an ambitious undertaking. At the time that it was completed and installed, it was the single largest stained glass window in the United States. And it was a real technical feat. At 24 feet in height and 20 feet in width, it was really an extraordinary accomplishment, especially for an artist who had no experience working in stained glass. And it is, as I'll discuss later, it is very pivotal in and of itself in Grant Wood's career. So by delving into newspaper archives, which cannot be underestimated for importance, I've been able to kind of piece together a little bit of a chronology. Doesn't give us precise dates when he goes to Germany or a precise date when he comes back, but the newspaper archives can be extraordinarily helpful for anyone doing research on Grant Wood, because he was well known in town, and he was well written about in town, and in fact some of his earlier trips are documented through letters that Grant Wood, or letters/articles that Grant Wood wrote himself to be published in the newspaper. So we kind of get a good insight into some of Grant Wood's doings, oftentimes through the newspaper archives. But we know that he was awarded the commission in January of 1927. And we also know from newspaper articles that he actually goes to New York City at the end of March in 27 for work on the window. It was a very well researched project for him. He took it very seriously and wanted it to be extraordinarily accurate. He himself was a veteran of the First World War, and it was very important to him that he get this right. We do know from an article in April of 28 that he's working on full-scale drawings at the Quaker Oats plant, which would give him the opportunity to do sort of full-scale 24-foot high recreation of the window prior to its fabrication. And we know from another article in May of that year that he was seeking individuals in the community who might have a Civil War or Spanish-American War uniforms that he could use. He wanted these uniforms of the 6 soldiers along the base of that window to be absolutely accurate. And he did a lot of research in that regard, but there was a call, if you will, put out in the paper for anyone who might have those uniforms, because obviously he must have been lacking them even at that point in time. So he's finishing the drawings in June. And then we know that by the end of December, he has returned from Germany. So somewhere in between those 2 dates, we really generally feel like from in the fall, September, and then back, probably in either late November or early December, was when he went to Germany. We know that he was also involved beyond the window in designing and decorating with the committee the Chamber of Commerce rooms at the Veterans Memorial Coliseum as well. And then we know from another article that the stained glass was expected to arrive in late January and be installed within 2 weeks. And like every other construction project, they didn't quite hit that target. And actual installation happened later, a little bit later. We know that on February 8th, they had begun installing the window the day before. So on February 7th. So pretty close to the timetable. There are other articles that expect the window to have been installed by September of 28, and they certainly didn't hit that target date either. But this is a kind of very broad, overarching, if you will, chronology of what I was able to discover by really delving into the newspaper archives. And there's all kinds of interesting tidbits from those articles that I will share as we go along. But there is also another artifact that I want to make sure everyone is aware of in the possession of the Figge Art Museum in Davenport, Iowa, is a wonderful sketchbook. And it's a sketchbook in which you will find a lot of Grant Wood's initial concept drawings for the window. Again, that's sort of a whole topic in and of itself. But in that sketchbook, you will see drawings such as this. This is one of the drawings from that sketchbook. And this is kind of a Revolutionary War soldier in which he has sketched out and then marked the various colors of the uniforms. And parts of the uniform, because he wanted the uniform to be absolutely accurate. You will also see in here concept drawings for the overall drawing, overall design, of the window, as well as drawings and designs for other parts of the building, in which he was also very much involved. And you can see that here on a separate sheet, a drawing specifically of the gun, and what parts were wood, what parts were steel. That's very, very important. He wanted these not just the uniform, but also the firearms to be absolutely accurate in the portrayal. Here, later in the same sketchbook, another drawing of a Revolutionary War soldier, and again, demarcating all of the various colors. This becomes very, very important later in the process, in the creation of the window itself. Here, a different soldier, again, all clearly articulated as to the various parts of the uniform and the colors that those parts should be. And here another page, which is interesting, it becomes again an issue later. Underneath each of the soldiers is a year spelled out in Roman numerals. One of the challenges that Grant Wood faced with using sort of normative Roman numeral lettering is trying to get some of the dates that are particularly long to fit inside or fit underneath the particular soldier. And so he took some creative liberties with Roman numerals, all quite legitimate, but some liberties that are sort of not quite the norm to get these letters to fit. So you can see here he's playing around with that. And that becomes actually an issue later in the creation of the window, which I will touch on in a tiny bit here. And this is what he created while he was here. Uh, and these are large scale drawings. You can see this one is one of the soldiers, the Revolutionary War soldier, who was which has been framed up separate from the rest. So in its frame, it's 96 inches tall. So it's a big drawing, and you can see it's really fully realized. And one of the things that people perhaps don't appreciate is that while Grant Wood certainly did do sketches like you see in his sketchbook, more normative, when he would do a drawing, it was a very finished, a fully realized drawing. And that's what you have in these remarkable drawings that are in the possession of the Veterans Memorial Coliseum Commission. For a long time, they were housed here at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. But now they are back with the Veterans Memorial Coliseum Commission, and they are, at least this one, the Revolutionary War soldier and the soldier from World War I, have been separated and framed and are oftentimes on view at the Veterans Memorial Coliseum. So you can see Grant Wood's drawing in addition to the window when you go to visit that location. And here's the other one that's been sort of put together here, the World War I a soldier, which of course was the only World War soldier at the time that Grant Wood created. We had not entered the Second World War. So this was the only World War, the Great War. And this gives you a sense that you can see that they're not perfect. They've seen a lot of life. There are losses to them, but by and large they're fairly intact. But oftentimes but there are areas that are fragmentary. There are some losses to them. And when they were in our possession here at the museum, we actually did an exhibition of the drawings for the Veterans Memorial Coliseum window. But of course, we don't have walls that are 24 feet high, and getting these little very fragile, fragmentary pieces to hang vertically would have been a challenge. So we just instead laid them out on the floor on a barrier sheet that you see here. And you would experience them by walking around them. It wasn't quite the same effect as you would if you hired a professional photographer to shoot down on them, which is what we did here. So this is the result of having a professional photographer come in, get up high and have this wonderful view down on this 2-scale drawing for the Veterans Memorial Coliseum window. You can see that both the Revolutionary War soldier and the World War I soldier are not included in this because they were at that time already separated and framed up. But you can see that most of the bits and pieces exist. Sometimes they're not still connected, but most of the bits and pieces of the window still exist, and you can see Grant Wood's actual beautiful line quality in these drawings. Here, accompanying that exhibition were the 2 framed up pieces that I mentioned, the Revolutionary War soldier and the World War I soldier. And here, an image from a June 3rd, 1928 article in the Gazette. What I've also included is the caption to that article. And you see Grant Wood and Arnold Pyle, his assistant, working on the window. Now, in some sources, people actually described this as Grant Wood working on the window, as I just mistakenly said myself. They're working on the drawings for the window. The window has not been fabricated at this point, even though it looks like they're working on the window itself. They're actually working on the drawings. This is them working in Quaker Oats on the drawings, and they've got them vertical. And it proved to be very, very important for Grant Wood, because in that same article, there's an interesting tidbit that I wanted to share with you. And it says, many difficulties have been encountered in drawing the working model for the window, in which there will be from 8,000 to 10,000 pieces of glass. One of the worst problems was the perspective. Wood was forced, after experimentation, to make lines and spaces in the top of the design wider than those at the bottom so that the figures would appear in proportion. Then he labored long to adjust the design so disfiguring leads would not cut the face. So it's interesting. I mean, Grant Wood, even though he did not have experience working in stained glass, had the wherewithal to do this large project and to get it into a vertical position so that he could see that he needed to adjust the leading lines up above so that they would look proportionate to the viewer standing at the base. And I thought that was an interesting aspect because Grant Wood was learning while he was doing these drawings, he was learning that he needed to accommodate the size, the scale of the piece, and the perspective of the individual viewer. So two things here. One, this is not Grant Wood working on the window, it's Grant Wood working on the drawings of the window. And number two, it's interesting to know that he is adjusting the thickness of the lines, especially near the top, to account for the perspective that the viewer would have in viewing the window from below. So the drawings were complete and they were sent off to the Emil Frey Art Glass Company in St. Louis, Missouri. And they, in turn, suggested that the window be fabricated instead through their sister organization. They had an outpost in Munich, Germany. Because it was such a large window, and because the Emil Frey Company was really super busy, there were a lot of stained glass windows being made at the time. It was kind of a watershed moment for stained glass windows. But because they were busy and they had this wonderful outpost already in Munich, which is where Emil Frey actually had studied himself, they decided that they wanted to ship this off to Munich and have it fabricated there. And so that meant that Grant Wood needed to go to Munich to work with the craftsmen in Munich for the creation of this work, with those drawings and presumably with his tiny sketchbook as well. And here is a photograph of Grant Wood in Munich, with some of the workers in Munich as well. And this was a postcard that they created, that the Emil Frey Company in Munich created and sent to Grant Wood afterwards. So presumably after Grant Wood has returned, Grant Wood was back in the States by November 30th, 1928. Which is the date that's on this particular postcard created from the photograph. So I think that Grant Wood certainly was home by late November in 1928, based on this particular item. These gentlemen have all been identified. We know who they are, but this is him there, and it was very important that he was there. Because he was the one who really helped make this vision of this window come to reality. So he was there, he was instrumental in making these drawings become these stained glass windows. And by that I meant that certainly the Emil Frey Company workers all knew how to make stained glass, but they did not know how to color an American Revolutionary soldier's uniform. But Grant Wood did, because he had done all of the research prior to that. And so he was there to interpret those drawings so that they would become accurate stained glass windows for the finished project. And I show you here another one of the soldiers. And this is just a portion. They tended to be sort of in half-body portions size-wise, like you see on the left. But if you look closely on the right, you can see that there's some, in addition to the pencil quality there, you can see that they actually wrote right on the drawings the colors that the various stained glass pieces needed to be. And I have a detail of the one on the right, which I hope is a little bit clearer. So this is a detail of the gun, of the rifle that soldier was holding, and you can see that mistakenly, these portions of glass had been marked as Holz, Holz, which stands for wood, which is the German word for wood. But you can see those have been crossed through, and instead they've been written over as Stahl, which is steel. And it was Grant Wood who was there, who was instructing the fabricators that this portion of this rifle needed to be metal, not wood. They wouldn't know Revolutionary War, or not Revolution. They wouldn't know any of the soldiers' uniforms or the armaments. And so Grant Wood, through his research and through the notes that he had taken and written, was there to make sure that this was all done correctly. And this is it is the one that the detail I showed you is from the third figure on the left. And you can see that rifle is mostly steel. It is not mostly wood. I think I may have a further detail of it there. So he was there to really help guide the process. But even more, I mean, he was there throughout all of this. And I have another article information to share with you. So bear with me because it's extremely small print here. But there's a wonderful article from January 13th, 1929. So right at the time, really, that the window is going to be installed. So it's been shipped, it's on its way, and it's going to be installed the following week. This is from the Cedar Rapids Sunday Gazette and Republican. And there are a couple of interesting things that I wanted to share with you. And so, let's see here. Then the tragedy, as all good newspaper articles, there's got to be a little drama in it. So then the tragedies. The soldiers had been transformed into uniformed saints. They had the pinched nose and small nostrils seen in Gothic art. They wore uniforms of soldiers of the United States, but they lacked their independent carriage, the air of force, that alert appearance, and the typical bony structure of the face. The Civil War soldier, with his beard, looked like a Christ. Remember, these men have spent their lives painting St. Peter's, Madonnas, and the Saviors in windows. Grant Wood admits now that he was heartstruck, unable to speak their language, unable to speak their language fluently. He said nothing rather than risk hurting their feelings when they were trying so hard. Again and again, they attempted to make the soldier figures. Again and again, they failed. The spirit of America was lacking. We'll have to teach you to paint glass, they finally said, and you can make these soldiers real Americans. And it goes on to say he tried and failed and failed. At last, Mr. Wood mastered the art of painting the glass. He did all of the soldiers' faces except that of the World War veteran, which Mr. Fry made. And the same thing happened there. He was there to kind of talk about the border. You can see the border of the various different divisions of the various services. He had made them too small when he saw them in glass, too small. And so he asked if they could redesign the border to make them larger so they would be more readable. And he was there on the spot to do that. And then, of course, came the numerals at the base of the different soldiers. There was an argument that occurred over the numerals, he said. He arrived at the plant one morning to find the men in an uproar. In order to keep the Roman numerals for the war years in the space under their respective figures, the artist had taken numerical liberties. For 1898, to illustrate, he had written MCCMIIC instead of MDCCCLXXXXVIII, which you can imagine would never have fit under there. He's wrong, maintained one faction. Right, contended another. The artist, who had been confident originally, began to have doubts. The men argued and worried. We'll settle it once for all, decided the foreman. We shall consult an expert at the University of Munich. So to the university the problem was referred. The American's numeral is unusual but technically justified, was the verdict. And so that's another sort of drama with the window. There's also some wonderful other anecdotes about the window in that January 13th article, including one that, throughout the experience, there was a great deal of respect between the German artisans and Grant Wood. They really talked about America as being Germany's greatest friend after the First War, and that Grant Wood, they were constantly asking Grant Wood questions about America, and it was really a sort of seen, at least in this article and other articles, it was really very much seen as a true collaboration and as a goodwill, almost a goodwill tour on the part of Grant Wood in Germany. I want to share another article from much later, from 1930, in which Grant Wood is also talking about the faces and how he had to paint them because they were looking a little too Gothic. They were looking a little too much like saints that one finds in more European windows. So, this is as related to the Chicago Evening Post magazine on March 11th of 1930. How Munich glassworkers masked saints and angels as U.S. soldiers and almost ruined a Great War memorial is related by Grant Wood, Cedar Rapids artist, whose paintings are on exhibition for 2 weeks at the National Academy of Art, 330 East Ohio Street. What is that figure? Demanded Wood one day as he was inspecting work on the window he had designed with figures of the 6 United States wars. That's a Civil War soldier, he was told. Maybe, replied Wood, but it looks like an angel to me. The Munich workmen had done so many religious subjects that all their soldiers' figures resembled saints and angels. So incapable were they of originating anything to catch the spirit of the American doughboy or Revolutionary War soldier that I finally had to paint the figures directly on the glass itself, Wood relates. Despite these difficulties, the window was completed and is now in the Coliseum at Cedar Rapids. It is the largest stained glass window in the United States. While in Munich, Wood prowled about the quaint old town and painted many of the bright little canvases in his present show. In them, he has caught much of the spirit of mellow antiquity, which the name of the city conjures up. There are also a number of Iowa landscapes, corn shocks and brooks and woodlands. And there is one flower painting of the type for which he is acquiring a national reputation. A large New York gallery recently began to handle these flower paintings. Exhibiting for the first time in the American show at the Chicago Art Institute this year, Wood's painting was selected for the group to be sent on circuit tour. It has since been invited to a show at the Toledo Museum, and there, of course, they're referencing Woman with Plants, which had been accepted the previous year for the annual exhibition in Chicago. There was also another exhibition of these quaint paintings that Grant Wood created while he was in Munich. So it's interesting. He worked, his primary goal, of course, was to work on the window. And it certainly seems like he spent a great deal of time doing that. But he did find time to sneak away and do paintings of some different locations in Munich. And also, we know from extant paintings that he also took a trip to Nuremberg. And there was an exhibition held in February of 1929. So really opening right at the time that the window's being installed. In the little gallery here in Cedar Rapids, and from various sources, been able to piece together some of those works that Grant Wood created on this trip. So this gives us greater insight, even though we don't know what he did on a daily basis and where he went when, but we are able to look at some of the things that really attracted his attention. So from two key articles, one written by Marvin Cohn on Grant Wood's exhibition. That one was published on February 14th of 1929. And then another article written by Ed Rowan, who is the director of the Little Gallery, from February 17th of 1929, been able to piece together some of the canvases or paintings on really mostly on board that Grant Wood included in this exhibition. It wasn't just the German pictures, though. He also had, as you can see from this list, although 24 paintings is what was said were in the show, we don't have a listing of all of them, but I have been able to piece together this list. And they include some things, some images that he did when he was in Colorado, 3 portraits, which are very, very important when we talk about Grant Wood's, evolution as an artist. And then some of the flower pieces for which he was gaining a national reputation, as we were told, and then some of the German works here. I think I'll share with you some of Marvin Cohn's comments on the exhibition and Ed Rowan's, and then I have pulled together as many of these images as I've been able to find, and that's where others can pick up and help find some of the other ones. So Marvin Cohn writes on February 14th, 1929, Grant Wood's new paintings shown at the Little Gallery are receiving much admiration. Grant Wood periodically has shown his work to Cedar Rapids, but the present exhibition of his recent paintings, now on display at the Little Gallery, 318 South 3rd Street, outdistances previous shows in skill of treatment, variety of subject matter, and color quality. 24 canvases, comprising still life, landscape, architectural compositions, and portraits, attest to the artist's varied interests and the wide range of his ability. The sun has been Mr. Wood's ally in the majority of his pictures, recently brought back from Munich, Germany. Quaint and picturesque houses in bright sunlight have inspired a series of notable compositions, very forcefully handled, both in design and technique. Their rich, warm colors rings like that of a good poster. Altogether, a cheery, stimulating group of paintings. Red and Yellow House, with its entertaining pattern of tree shadows and its broad, clean contrast of light and shade, is an outstanding canvas in this group from Munich. Red Bedding is a vigorous picture handled in a modern way. A study in angles presents an effective design, radiant in sunlight and in the subject matter fascinating from the architectural standpoint. A smaller study of houses in light and shadow are without exception full of life and very attractive. 36 Dom Street, picturing an old pump in a courtyard, has excellent color quality. House by the Church is one of the most satisfying in the exhibition, and Market Day Nuremberg, although a quiet, low-tone painting, is a favorite because of its composition and well-considered values. And he goes on to talk about some of the portraits. But before we get into that, I thought I would share with you some of those images. You can see that they don't all date from 1928. There are some that date from a little bit earlier. And one of those is Grant Wood's portrait of Sally Staymates, which was in the show. And this was Grant Wood's first sort of really formal portrait. Certainly he had been using models throughout all of his career. But in this particular case, this was a portrait of the young Sally Staymates. You can see here holding a block with an S on it, which is, of course, appropriate. for Sally's Daymates. And this is all happening really at the same time that he is working on the stained glass window drawings. So, you know, it's interesting, and this is one of the things that I always remark about when people talk about the change in Grant Wood's style from American Impressionism, and we'll see a few examples of those coming right up, to his more harder-edged, firmer edged compositions of his mature style. It's not just simply one cause. I think it's actually multiple causes. One of which I think is the fact that in the late 20s, right as Grant Wood is changing the style, there is this series of commissions for portraits. And portraiture, frequently the person commissioning the portrait wants the portrait to look like the person. And oftentimes that means putting aside impressionistic style for a firmer edge style. And Grant Wood was always very responsive to the needs of the person commissioning things from him. And so while there are artists who can do wonderful portraits in an impressionistic style, I think Grant Wood felt that when it came to these portraits, he wanted them to be a little bit more sort of photorealistic, looking more like the person. This is a wonderful capture of the young Sally's Daymates. And from the very next year, he does this incredibly important commission for him of John B. Turner, a pioneer, commissioned by one of his major patrons, David Turner, and his son. And you can see here again, a gentleman, formidable gentleman in front of a map of Lynn County. And sort of bespeaks to his role as a pioneering businessman in the community. Again, a really well conceived, but not very impressionistic portrait. Or here, Master Gordon Fennell, commissioned by his father, Gordon Fennell. And here again, you can see while there might be elements of the composition, small elements of the composition that are still a bit impressionistic, by and large, Grant Wood is creating at this very, very pivotal time a much firmer edged composition. And it is at the same time that he's working on the stained glass window, which, because of the requirement of using leading to hold the glass into place, everything needs a very firm edge. It's very almost impossible to do an impressionistic stained glass window because the leading requires you to have edges. And so I think it's interesting that at this moment in Grant Wood's career, he's receiving this wonderful series of portraits, and all three of these portraits were in this exhibition in early 1929, at the same time that he's working on the most important commission of his life, of his career, and has to conceive of it in a way quite different than he had been painting his canvases. So these two things are going on at the same time, and I think both of them contribute, kind of usher in this new phase that we see in the 1930s, this new phase in Grant Wood's career. Both of these are very, very important. Now he still, here's a bowl of flowers. We don't know that this is the flower composition. None of the flower compositions in the 1929 exhibition at the Little Gallery are named precisely by title. But this is the kind of flower painting he was doing in late 1920s. It still has a very strong impressionistic feel to it. Or here from 1928-29, the precise moment that he's doing all of these other portraits, you can see his wonderful calendulas. There are elements of this that are very firm at edge, but there are other elements of this composition that are also very loose, very painterly, has that impressionistic brushwork that we see in the majority of the works that he created in the 1920s. And then here is Red and Yellow House in Munich. This is one of the works that Marvin Cohn mentioned specifically in his review. He said it has an entertaining pattern of tree shadows, and its broad, clean contrast of light and shade is an outstanding canvas in this group from Munich. And this is a work that belongs to the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. We acquired it recently in 2008. And it is currently on view in our gallery dedicated to Grant Wood, so you can come and see it yourself. And you can see it is all about light and shade. Marvin was absolutely right. Grant Wood is, and especially through all of his impressionistic work, and this is quite impressionistic when you see it in person, he has always been fascinated with light. And even when his style changes and it becomes much firmer edged, light is still the foundation of all of his compositions. And here he's doing it in a very impressionistic way. In his mature style, he's doing it in a much harder edged way. But this is where he's obviously able to take a little time away from working on the window, go out and grab a very quick impression of some of the unique architecture that Munich has to offer. And really, I think what he's in love with more than anything else here is light and shade, is the shadow of that tree falling across that structure. Now, the study in angles, which was specifically referenced as well by Marvin Cohn, is not a composition I've been able to locate. And so it certainly it can be out there. It may be in a private collection, could be in a public collection, but I was not able to find out anything more about it. But it does sound like from Marvin Cohn's description that is an architecturally based a composition. So I would be very, very keen to fill in this blank slide with an image of the work so we get a sense of what that composition looked like. But we do have a representation here of 36 Dom Street or Domstrasse. This is in the possession of the Dubuque Museum of Art, and it is the water pump that Marvin Cohn described. Again, this is really a composition about light. Sunlight, this extraordinary sunlight in Germany that is sort of caressing various buildings and the pump itself. Again, Grant Wood is very much working in an American impressionistic style here, capturing this impression very, very quickly, but really capturing it in all of its finer points. And really, the thing he's trying to capture the most seems to be light. And light as it falls on these structures. Marketplace Nuremberg, here a wonderful little oil sketch from that was last seen in a Christie sale in 2007. This is, we know from this work, and the next one I'll show you that he did make a trip to Nuremberg. We don't have that in any written accounts, but we know from the artwork that he created that he did do a getaway to Nuremberg. While we don't know the location of the current location of this particular work, we do know that the composition he created after it, a much larger piece, 22 by 17 inches, is in the possession of the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. And this is one that he did on canvas. Grant Wood did not work on canvas frequently. He loved working on composition board, canvas board, particle board, various different kinds, but he didn't work on canvas frequently. So it was important when he actually set about doing work on canvas. It was more expensive for him to do, and he wanted to recreate that quick impression that we saw on the Christie's piece. In a larger composition that we see here, and I thought I had a full screen of it as well. A rainy day in Nuremberg, and Grant Wood captures that. It's very much in keeping with the kind of American impressionistic style he was doing, and following sort of the typical impressionists working method of capturing locations at different times of day, in different seasons, and under different weather conditions, all of which really affect the light of the scene, and of course that is really at the very foundation of what Impressionism is. Red bedding is one that Marvin Cohn mentioned. I found it at the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston. It's a fairly recent acquisition for them. They received it in 2011. It's a little bit larger piece here. And it very much sort of is again, about light, but also about how light strikes these very, very interesting and new and different kinds of architecture for Grant Wood as well. Marvin calls it a vigorous picture handled in a modern way. Here, Sunlit House from the Figge Art Museum. It dates from 1928. It was also in the exhibition by title. And you can see again, it is about the dapple of light as it plays across this house. Again, you can see bedding hanging out over the railing in this particular case. And this is another composition he created during his time in Munich. And then P. Greenhouse. Now, this is an interesting piece. I had a hard time finding P. Greenhouse, an image of it. And it turned out that I stumbled across an email that we received 2009, I believe. And somebody had a composition and sent along some pictures of it. And it written on the back was P. Greenhouse. And, at the time, we did not, really know of this weren't aware of this 1929 exhibition or the list of works in it. And this was one of the pieces that were listed in it from Ed Rowan's review of the show article on the exhibition. And so there was sort of an aha moment for me to say, this email, and we tend to throw nothing away. This email from 2009, I believe it was, which showed the front and back of this work, and on the back written was P. Greenhouse, has to be the same P. Greenhouse that we see listed in a newspaper article archives of the 1929 exhibition. So it was wonderful to kind of put these two together. Now, we don't have the digital images. Actually, a scan from a color printout from images that were sent to us back in 2009. So, but it is the same piece, and you can see again, it's about light and shadow. I mean, the shadow of a building behind the artist as it hits the front of this P. Greenhouse. And I would love to see this composition in person, because there's this puddle of water at the very foot of the composition that reflects that building, which is a wonderful detail, a wonderful addition on the part of Grant Wood, and terrific sort of insight, and a piece that is current location I do not know. And here, Yellow House, Munich, from 1928. This is from James Dennis's book on Grant Wood, and this is actually a scan of the image he reproduces. He only reproduced it in black and white, so I don't have a color image to share with you. But it is another one of these quintessential Munich buildings with wash hanging out the window. You see Grant Wood running a theme here, I guess. On his time in Munich, seeing a lot of wash hanging out, drying in the open air. And again, even though it's a black and white photograph, you can see it's really about light and shadow. You can see the shadow again of a building that's unseen, that's not in the in the image itself, casting shadow onto these structures across the street. And here, a German village from the Stanley Museum of Art that I found in search of their collection, looking for something else, actually. And so it seemed very, very likely this was also created at that time, even though it's not something that I've seen in any of the newspaper archives. It seems likely that this was also created, but not mentioned by name in the articles. And then there is mentioned in both articles, house by the church, and I haven't been able to locate it. But I don't know, but it could possibly be how this piece was known, because this is a house and you can see a church steeple in the background. Don't know if it's the same one, but this paint composition is known today as Blue House Munich. It is at the Stanley Museum, wonderful work that was acquired in 2011. And I'm not suggesting it's the same piece. I'm saying it could potentially have been the same piece, just known under a different name back in 1929 than it is today. But it is also again an image of Grant Wood's fascination with light and shade, with how sunlight is hitting and picking out these wonderfully geometric forms of architecture. And then listed was also Latin Quarter. And the only piece that I could find that actually was called Latin Quarter was this piece. It's currently in a commercial gallery, Wolf's Gallery in Cleveland. They dated it as 1920. I've seen it also dated elsewhere as circa 1924. But if this is the same, piece that was in the exhibition, it could also have dated from closer to around 1928. Completely unknown at this point. Very, very different kind of style, very than the others. It's very, very thinly painted, and a lot of the board is showing through in this. I do not know that this is the same piece exactly that was in the exhibition, but it is the only piece that I was able to find under that title by Grant Wood. So this gives us a little bit more insight into some of the work that Grant Wood was creating kind of on the side when he was over in Germany working on the stained glass window. But scholars have also suggested that the change in Grant Wood's style from the loose painterly style of American Impressionism to the much tighter style that one finds in his mature period could have been due to the Neue Sachlichkeit movement that was present at the time. The new objectivity is how that translates. It was really a reaction to, it was on the part of German artists, a reaction to German Expressionism. And it was primarily in the 1920s, and it does represent a much tighter painting style than one would find in German Expressionism. And so a number of scholars have suggested that it was perhaps the Neue Sachlichkeit that precipitated this change in Grant Wood's style. And I did a little bit of research, far from thorough, but a little bit of research on artists who were working in the Neue Sachlichkeit style in Munich. And I gathered a couple of representative examples of their work to share with you, so you have a kind of an idea of what these scholars are talking about. So here, one of the four artists that we know were working in Munich at the time, in the late 20s. Some of these works post-date. I'll say post-date Grant Wood's time in Munich, but they are typical of the style of these artists. So I just pulled together some representative examples. You can see that they do certainly have a much harder edge or firmer edged style than one would find in Expressionism, but yet they do still feel quite distinctively different from Grant Wood's work itself. But he certainly would have seen these or works similar to these by these artists during his 3 or so month sojourn in Germany, and they could very well have had a bearing on his painting style. But they are quite different, and there's nothing here that you would see that would say, oh gosh, that looks exactly like a Grant Wood. But he would be, certainly have been familiar. However, much more possible, much more probable, I should say, is the fact that Grant Wood no doubt went to various museums, both in Munich and in Nuremberg, and he is quoted later as saying that he was very struck by what he would call sort of Gothic works, which we would know more today as Northern Renaissance paintings in particular. And so I pulled together a couple of examples from various museums that Grant Wood could have gone to, and so the kind of things that he would see. These two tend to be very, very firm-edged compositions, a little bit more narrative in scope, and Grant Wood certainly enjoyed the narrative, and also very, very detailed and decorative. And that was something else that Grant Wood was very, very interested. Here at the Alte Pinakothek in Munich, this wonderful self-portrait by Dürer, or this Adoration of the Magi by Roger van der Weyden. Again, one's a little bit more portrait that might have resonated for Grant Wood, having come off of three very significant kind of portraits at that time, but also his interest in narrative, in storytelling, in a lot of his compositions would have found an echo in the work of someone like Roger van der Weyden. But it's actually Hans Memling that Grant Wood is recorded as mentioning by name as somebody that he's done some research into. And so there were Memlings in Germany, and we don't know exactly which ones. He didn't, precisely say, but this is one Memling from the Alte Pinakothek in Munich, and he again, he's the only artist that Wood specifically lists from this period that he really sort of resonated with, that he did a study of. So here a religious image of an enthroned Madonna with St. George and the donor. But Memling also did these wonderful portraits. Now this is one that's in the Museum of Fine Arts in Antwerp, so not something you would have seen in his Germany sojourn, but something if he really did set about doing research, and he was a fairly thorough researcher, if he did research, he could have found images of Memlings of this kind of portrait type. And that would have been very top of mind for him, having just done the portrait of Sally Staymates and the portrait of John B. Turner, pioneer. And you can see, you've got these wonderful sort of half-length figures, oftentimes with an attribute, and these two, because he mentioned Memling particularly by name, these two could have very much resonated with Grant Wood and helped facilitate a change in his style. And so he comes home and paints this. So this is the portrait he does in 1929 of his mother, a woman with plans, and one can see how very sort of connected a portrait like this is to the work of Hans Memling. Suddenly now, unlike Sally Staymates, unlike John B. Turner, even unlike Gordon Fennell, he's placed the figure half-length out in the landscape with this wonderful graded sky that kind of goes from blue to white, which we see very clearly in the work of Memling, holding an attribute. Again, the style here is much firmer edged. If you look closely at a composition like this, there are painterly qualities in the face and hands still. It's not as if he just flips a switch. It's a progress for him. He is evolving as an artist, and so here this work is a wonderful sort of combination of his past with his interest in Impressionism, and also what is to become his future, which is a much firmer edged composition. And it's not much of a leap to go from this work in 1929 to this work in 1930, which is basically going from a single portrait of a single individual to a double portrait composition the very next year. Again, this is another work that if you look very closely at the hands and the faces, they betray a certain painterliness still. Kind of American Impressionist style, whereas the rest of the composition is much firmer edged. And again, it too is a transitional piece, I think. And so this is in many ways why people really point to Grant Wood's trip to Germany as being so very, very pivotal to his development as an artist. And his work on the stained glass window, largely because he was exposed, perhaps in a very, for the first time, or perhaps sort of in a much greater depth, to the work of Northern Renaissance painters like Hans Memling. There could have been a bit of the Neue Sachlichkeit in there too, but let's not also forget about Grant Wood's incredible, 2 years work on the stained glass window and having to really conceive of a composition with very firm edges, the edges required to hold glass in place, and the fact that in the late 1920s, he took on a series of portrait commissions and realized those in a different style, a style that probably was more pleasing to the person commissioning the portrait. So I think it's actually, in reality, all of these different things happening almost at the same time that usher in this new style, moving Grant Wood away from a purely American impressionistic painter to the painter of American Gothic. And I think all of these things come together neatly, and it's all facilitated by Grant Wood's trip in the fall of 1928 to Munich, to Germany. And I think that is my last slide. Indeed it is. So I will stop sharing my composition and be happy to try to answer any questions that you might have. It was, as I said, on some levels, a black hole, but one I willingly and happily went down because I was able to discover much more about Grant Wood and his time, even though we don't have documentary evidence, we don't have a diary, we don't have a clear schedule when he left for Germany and when he came back from Germany, and it may be out there, I just wasn't able to locate it. But it was great fun bringing together all of these compositions of the kinds of work that he did while he was in Germany, when he could sneak away from the stained glass window, because he was not just working on the stained glass window, but he was visiting museums and he was painting, and all of this in a very, very compact period of time, which proved to be very, very pivotal for his career. So I see we had a question in the chat. Let me open that up. Okay, let's see. Here, is the stained glass window still the largest in the U.S.? No, I don't believe that it still retains that distinction. It's still an amazingly large stained glass window, but I don't think it still holds the record as the largest single stained glass window. There are lots of stained glass window compositions where there's multiple parts together that were even bigger than Grant Wood's, but this was at his time the largest single stained glass window. Any other questions, people? You don't have to put them in the chat. You can unmute yourself if you would like, and see if I can come up with some answers for you. Well, hearing none, I hope that, oh wait, there's one more. Let me go down. Late breaking one. Just, I enjoyed pulling together all of these threads too. Yes, thank you, Vernell. It's fun when you can take a sidestep, get back into sort of digging down and trying to unravel a mystery. And in many ways, the trip to Germany was a mystery for me. We know he went. A lot of scholars knew he went. They know he worked on the stained glass window. I'm not sure people, some people were aware that, he did other compositions while he was there, and he went to museums, and he probably saw the Neue Sachlichkeit, although he really tended to favor older work like Northern Renaissance painting. But, it was for me, a fascinating voyage of discovery, looking at what he created while he was there, and how that influenced his later work. So you can see, even while he was in Munich, he's still absolutely working in American Impressionism in his own composition. But all of these things come together. And that exposure to Hans Memling, the work on the stained glass window, the portraiture that he had been working on, and his exposure to the Neue Sachlichkeit all came together to usher in a new style for him that, while much more time consuming for him, really precipitated the creation of some of the most sort of remarkable pieces of his mature career, and ushered in, what was eventually to become his most famous piece.
That was really, really, really interesting, Sean. Thank you. I particularly found interesting about painting the faces on the windows. And there's also one of the men has no shirt on, so there's his chest.
Yep.
And I think a lot of that must have been painted by Grant because of the way it is done.
Mhm.
It's very much like the original sketch or the original drawing that he did of the piece. And I know from experience how difficult that is to do on glass because you're using this thing called Schwarzlot, which is mixed with vinegar. And then you have to put it on and then brush it with a badger hair brush. And he must have really worked hard to learn how to do that. And he will have, and since it's so, or not all of them, but most of the faces are very sort of Grant Woodian. Um, he he clearly must have really thrown himself into it. Very, very interesting for me to see.
I think that's a wonderful observation, Stephen. Yes, I think it was very difficult for him to learn how to paint on glass. I mean, when we say paint on glass, we don't mean just paint on glass. I mean, it has to be able to stand up to time.
Yeah,
It's a completely different surface for him. I mean, maybe some of his experience painting on smooth particle board might have set him up well to paint on glass, but it's a completely different technique. And
totally.
he has to learn it. And, they basically said, they threw their hands up and said, you've got to do it yourself. And then to do it right. I
Yeah,
mean, it's one thing to learn how to do it, but then do it in the way that's right, so it has the outcome that you want
right, right.
as an artist. And yeah, when you look at the faces, they are completely Grant Wood. They've got, the very, very different tonalities. There's a softness, to them
Yeah,
that
yeah,
comes, he really was such an amazing and accomplished artist. And we, I think we're continuing to discover how really good an artist he was. And to teach yourself this in a really short period of time,
right.
to teach yourself completely new techniques, and to be successful at them while you're doing all of this other stuff and while you're having trouble communicating. I mean, certainly Emil Fry was helpful in translating, to the workmen there. He certainly was fluent in both German and in English, but you cannot communicate how to paint a face. And so you're absolutely right. This was a formidable task, and he readily admitted that he failed and failed and failed until he got it right.
Yeah, well, he would have, but he did it, which is great. Does that glass company still exist in Munich?
Emil Fry still exists, yes, by
How
descent.
interesting.
It's
Yeah.
all still in the family. Now, it does not exist in Munich. It was taken over in 1933 by the Nazis, and it was actually destroyed in an Allied bombing.
Oh, oh dear.
And so that building in Munich no longer exists, but the Emil Fry Company in St. Louis still exists. I don't believe it exists in the same location, but it still exists, and they're still making fine art glass.
Okay, so it doesn't exist in Germany anymore, then it
No, afraid not.
took off over the Atlantic. Okay.
And Emil Fry, from what I understand from his biography, although it's another story altogether, was an artist. Always knew he wanted to be an artist, but left in the late 19th century because he was feeling oppressed in Germany, and moved to New York first. To continue his artistic studies,
Yeah, right.
and then I forget, he met his wife, um, and she was from Germany as well, and they went to the West Coast, and I may have some of the details wrong here, but she was very she was missing Germany a great deal, and they were going to move back to Germany because she was missing it so. but he got a commission or a job in St. Louis, and so kind of moving their way back to Germany, right? I got this job in St. Louis, and they found this German enclave in St. Louis where they were, you know, where they continued to speak German and uphold German traditions, and she was content, and so they
Ah, good.
stayed
Oh, yeah.
because they found a German neighborhood basically in St. Louis, and she was happy. And so they didn't need to move back, but he obviously still went back and forth because he had this branch of his company when he started his own company shortly thereafter in St. Louis, and he had a branch in Munich just because the workload was so enormous.
Right.
Everyone was doing stained glass windows at that time,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
so
yeah.
he went to a place that knew how to make stained glass windows, and just and had an outpost in Munich, and got and in one of the articles I read, got permission to have the window made in Germany. That was an important part too, because there's a lot more to the Germ to the stained glass window story
Yeah.
that involves its fabrication in Germany and how that was received by certain groups here in Cedar
Yeah.
Rapids,
I can imagine.
because we
Yeah.
had been,
Yeah.
at war with Germany,
Exactly. Exactly.
very
Right.
very long memories here in Cedar
Right. Right.
Rapids.
Yeah. Really interesting. How did you identify the craftsman in the photograph where Grant is I think he's seated and the others are standing? Was that through the Emil Frey company or
I want to say that um, I want to say it was in one of the articles,
okay. Right.
because they were listed by first initial and last name, and so I think
Right.
it's in one of the articles,
Okay.
and yeah, so that's how I know that they've been identified.
Yeah, right, right, right. I also think it's just musing on this thing. He spent all this time struggling to learn how to paint faces on glass with his badger hair brush, and then became really interested in memeling, which is sort of somehow goes together.
Hmm.
Yeah, right. It will
Absolutely.
have changed his view of faces.
Hmm.
So, right, right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right.
Any other questions or comments? Well, I thank you all for joining me today. If
Thank
you
you.
are interested in all things Grant Wood, we do these quarterly, and they are recorded, and they do go onto our YouTube page. So if you go to YouTube, type in Cedar Rapids Museum of Art, and then click on videos, you'll see the others in this series of Grant Wood in Focus. And we have another series on there as well called One Night Stand. That's where we look at one work by one artist for one night. Some of those are pieces by Grant Wood as well. So if you are a Grant Wood aficionado, a Grant Wood lover, Grant Wood enthusiast, we've got plenty of material for you there as well
Okay.
as lots of other stuff if you're so interested.
Yeah.
And certainly, if you are in the area, come check out Grant Wood in person in our gallery that's dedicated to his work. There you will find Red and Yellow House Munich on view, which we use as sort of that example of that transition moment. It hangs right next to John B. Turner Pioneer, which was happening at the same time, which hangs right next to One Woman Plan. So you can kind of see this real interesting progression in his work, because it is such a critical moment, and Germany is a very very big part of that. So thank you for joining me. Have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.